I slammed the power of attorney document down on the kitchen table so hard the coffee mugs rattled. Ryan froze. "You want to explain this?" I said. "Because I found it. In your drawer, with my name already on it." His face went white. For 4 months my son had been living in my house, eating my food, calling me Dad every single morning, and this whole time he had been filling out paperwork to take control of my money, my medical decisions, my entire life. He opened his mouth. I held up my hand. "Don't," I said. "Don't you dare lie to me right now." The silence between us was the loudest thing I had ever heard. And in that moment, standing in the kitchen of the home I built with my own hands, looking at my son's guilty face, I made a decision that would change both of our lives forever. He thought he was burying me. He had no idea I had already made the call that would bury his plan instead. Tell me what city you're watching from right now. Drop it in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You will not want to miss what happens next. My name is Walter Harrison. I am 76 years old. And I want to tell you something before this story goes any further. Something I need you to understand, because without it, none of what happened will make the kind of sense that keeps you up at night. I am not a bitter man. I have never been this kind of person who holds grudges, who keeps score, or who measures love by what gets written down in legal documents. I spent 45 years running a furniture repair shop in a small town outside Portland, Oregon. Do you know what kind of man runs a furniture repair shop? Not a rich man, not a powerful man, a patient man. A man who looks at something broken and thinks, "I can fix this. I can make this right again." That was me. That was always me. I fixed other people's furniture, other people's heirlooms, other people's beloved things. And I never once thought the thing I'd have the hardest time fixing would be my own family. My wife Evelyn passed away 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. 11 weeks, and I want you to think about that number for a moment, because it tells you everything about how much time you actually have to prepare yourself when the person you've built your entire life around is suddenly leaving it. 11 weeks. Evelyn was the kind of woman who remembered every birthday in the family, cousins, neighbors, the woman at the post office who always complimented her earrings. She kept a paper calendar on the refrigerator. She baked pies from scratch. She laughed at my terrible jokes even after 43 years of marriage, and I'm telling you, those were bad jokes. She had every right to stop laughing years earlier. When she was gone, the house didn't just feel empty. It felt like a building that had forgotten its purpose. My son Ryan was 44 years old when his mother died. He called me every week after the funeral, I'll give him that. He checked in. He asked how I was eating. He'd drive up some weekends with his wife Lauren, and they'd bring groceries, and we'd sit around the kitchen table, and it felt for a little while like things could still be okay. Ryan is a good-looking man, always was. He got Evelyn's eyes that warm sort of hazel that makes people trust you before you've even said a word. He works in real estate development down in Portland, commission-based. Good years and bad years. Lauren is a marketing consultant. Sharp woman, very put together. The kind of person who, when she walks into a room, makes you feel slightly underdressed, even if you're wearing your Sunday best. They got married 11 years ago. No children. They live well, or they try to. I noticed over the years that their lifestyle always seemed to run just a little ahead of their income. New car every few years. Vacations I'd see on Facebook. A nice condo in the Pearl District that I was pretty sure cost more than they ever let on. But I never said anything. A man doesn't judge his son for wanting a comfortable life. Lord knows I wanted one too when I was that age. It was Lauren who first brought up the idea of them moving in. This was about 8 months after Evelyn passed. Ryan called me on a Sunday afternoon, I remember, because the Trailblazers game was on and I had to turn the volume down. And he said, "Dad, Lauren and I have been talking. We're worried about you being out there alone. What would you think about us coming to stay with you for a while, just to help out, just to keep you company?" I won't lie to you. I felt a wave of relief wash over me so strong it almost knocked me sideways. "Are you sure?" I asked him. "It's a long drive from Portland. I don't want you giving up your dad, he said, and his voice was gentle and firm at the same time, the way his mother's used to get when she'd already made up her mind about something. You're not a burden. You're my father. Let us do this. I said yes. Of course I said yes. They moved in on a Saturday in early October. Ryan had this energy about him when he arrived, cheerful, purposeful, rolling up his sleeves before he'd even finished unloading boxes. Lauren walked through the house like she was seeing it for the first time, even though she'd been here dozens of times before. She kept touching things, running her fingers along the mantel, pausing in doorways, looking up at the ceilings. I told myself she was just admiring the old place. I had built that house with Evelyn in 1987. We didn't hire it out, we designed it together. Every room had a decision behind it, an argument behind it, a compromise behind it, and usually a good laugh behind it too. The kitchen window was positioned the way it was because Evelyn wanted to see the backyard while she did the dishes. The porch faced west because I wanted to watch the sunset. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, more square footage than 2 people probably needed, but we had hoped for more children, and it never happened, so we filled the space with the life we had instead. The house had value, I knew that. Property in that area had gone up considerably over the years. I wasn't naive about that. I just didn't think my son had made a spreadsheet about it. The first month was good, genuinely good. Ryan made breakfast some mornings. Lauren organized my pantry, which I'll admit needed organizing. Evelyn was the system behind all of that, and without her, things had gotten a little chaotic. We watched TV together in the evenings. Ryan fixed the porch step that had been sagging since the spring. It felt like a family again, and I want you to understand that I want you to feel what that meant to me. After a year and a half of rattling around alone in a house built for more people than I'd become, having my son under my roof felt like oxygen. I was grateful. I was so deeply, foolishly grateful. The questions started small. Dad, do you have a financial advisor? Someone helping you manage things? I told him, yes. I had used the same accountant for 20 years, a man named Bill Dempsey. Old school guy, right? Ryan said. No offense, but those guys can miss things. Lauren has a friend who works in wealth management. Might be worth a conversation. I said I'd think about it. A few weeks later, Dad, what are you doing with Evelyn's life insurance payout? Is that just sitting in a savings account? I told him it was invested conservatively. Conservatively, he repeated, and he said the word in this tone, not mean, not aggressive, just slightly disappointed. Like I'd told him I was still using a flip phone. We should probably look at that together, Dad. Make sure you're getting the best return. I told him I appreciated the concern. The week after that, Lauren started talking about the house. She was subtle about it at first. She'd say things like, this kitchen could be something really spectacular with an open concept renovation. Or, have you ever thought about what this place could go for on the current market? Because property out here is just, it's incredible right now. I'd nod, change the subject. But it kept coming back. Ryan started mentioning senior communities, not pushing, not demanding, just mentioning. There's a really beautiful place about 20 minutes from our condo in Portland, Dad. Gorgeous facility. Independent living, so you'd have all your freedom but with staff on site. Lauren and I looked it up. They have a woodworking shop, which I know you'd love. I have a woodworking shop, I said. It's called my garage. He laughed. I know, just might be worth touring. As an option. I'm not looking for options, I said. I'm living in my home. He dropped it. For about a week. I'm going to tell you about the evening everything changed. But first, I need to tell you about who I am when I'm scared. Some men get loud when they're frightened. They go on the offensive. They come out swinging. I am not that man. I never have been. When something threatens me, truly threatens me, I go quiet. I go still. I learned that from working with wood all those years. You don't force wood. You read it. You feel where it wants to go. You work with the grain, not against it, and you always wait for the right moment to make your cut. It was a Tuesday evening in early December. Ryan was on the phone in the living room. I was coming down the hallway toward the kitchen. I was going to get a glass of water. That's all, nothing dramatic, just a glass of water before bed. And I heard his voice through the half-open door. He wasn't speaking quietly. He thought I was asleep. I'm telling you, the location alone is worth it. Corner lot, mature trees, original structure. With a full reno, we're talking 2.5, maybe pushing 3 million easy. I stopped walking. My hand was resting on the wall of the hallway. I can still feel the texture of that paint under my fingertips. The timing depends on Dad, he said. But honestly, I don't think it's going to be long. He's getting slower. He gets confused sometimes. Lauren's already started looking at places for him in Portland. There's one that's actually really nice. Not one of those depressing ones. Silence. He was listening to someone on the other end. No, he doesn't suspect anything, Ryan said. He's trusting. That's the thing about him, he's always just trusted people. It'll be fine. More silence. Then, and this is the moment I need you to hear, because this is the sentence that did not just break my heart. It restructured it, he said. He's had his time, you know. Now it's our turn. I did not move. I stood in that hallway with my hand pressed against the wall of the home I had built with my bare hands and my wife's laughter, and I did not make a single sound. Because the man I raised my son, the boy I taught to ride a bike and helped through homework and drove to baseball practice and held when his mother died, was standing 30 feet away from me in my living room, casually discussing the timeline of my removal from my own life. He's had his time. I went back to my bedroom. I closed the door softly. I sat on the edge of the bed. Evelyn sighed. I don't know why, I just did, and I sat there for a long time in the dark. And I made a decision. Not from anger, not from panic, from something much quieter and much more permanent than either of those things. I was not going to let this happen. I want to stop here and tell you something, because I know some of you listening to this are parents. Some of you have children who call every week and bring groceries and say all the right things. And I know some of you have sat with a small cold feeling in your chest, the kind you can't quite name, wondering if the love you're receiving is for you or for what you represent. That's a terrible question to have to ask yourself about your own child. It is one of the loneliest questions in the world. I am telling you this because I don't want you to feel ashamed if you've asked it. I don't want you to feel foolish. What happened to me is not a story about a stupid old man who got taken advantage of. It is a story about a man who loved his son so much that he refused to see the truth until the truth announced itself in the cruelest possible way. And then he decided to do something about it. The next morning, I came downstairs at my regular time, 6:30, coffee going before either of them were up. Ryan came down at 7, same as always, hair still messy in his gray Portland State sweatshirt. He poured himself a mug and sat across from me at the kitchen table. "Morning, Dad," he said. "Sleep okay?" "Like a rock," I told him. He smiled. "Good. You looked tired yesterday." "I feel good," I said. "You want eggs?" "Sure," he said. "I'll make them." And we sat there, my son and I, eating eggs at the table of the home he was quietly planning to sell, and I smiled and asked about his week and listened to him talk about a development project he was working on, and I gave nothing away. Nothing. Because I had learned something the night before that I should have understood years earlier. The most powerful thing I owned was not my house. It was not my savings. It was not my name on the deed, or the will, or the insurance policy. The most powerful thing I owned was what I knew. And what I knew, Ryan did not yet know I knew. I called Margaret Collins that afternoon. Margaret had helped Evelyn and me draft our wills back in 2009. She was in her early 60s now, semi-retired, but she still took cases for long-time clients. Her assistant picked up, and I said, "This is Walter Harrison. I need to speak with Margaret as soon as possible. It's important." There was a pause, and then the assistant said, "Margaret had time Thursday morning." I said Thursday was fine. I did not write it on the kitchen calendar. I programmed the appointment into my phone, which Ryan had helped me set up 6 weeks earlier. And I noticed with fresh eyes now that he had turned on location sharing between our devices. At the time, he'd told me it was so he'd know if I ever had an emergency. I turned it off that afternoon while he was out getting groceries. Let him wonder. The days between that phone call and my Thursday appointment were among the strangest of my life. I went about my routine exactly as I always had. I had my coffee. I watched the news. I went out to the garage and worked on the old Morris chair I'd been restoring for a neighbor named Frank. Ryan came and went. Lauren was working from the guest room most mornings on video calls I could hear through the wall but couldn't quite make out. But I watched them differently now. I noticed things I had excused away before. I noticed the way Lauren always angled conversations toward the house, its condition, its upkeep, what it might need in the coming years, as if age was something to be strategically managed rather than simply lived. I noticed the way Ryan would ask me questions about my finances with this careful, calibrated casualness, like a man playing cards who very much does not want you to know he's counting them. I noticed that when I mentioned old friends, neighbors, people from town I'd known for decades, Ryan would sometimes say things like, "You don't need to worry about driving out there anymore, Dad," or "Lauren could pick that up for you," quietly, incrementally beginning to position himself between me and the rest of my life. I noticed, and I said nothing, because I had learned the hard way at 76 years old, standing in a hallway, listening to my own son, that the most dangerous thing you can do when someone is underestimating you is to correct them. Margaret Collins hadn't changed much in 15 years. She was a compact, sharp-eyed woman with silver hair cut close and reading glasses that she pushed up on her forehead when she wasn't using them, a habit I remembered from our first meeting. She had a kind of stillness about her that I've always associated with people who have heard a great deal and learned to choose their reactions carefully. I sat down in her office, and I told her everything, all of it. The phone call, the real estate research, the conversations about senior communities, the way the questions had moved slowly and strategically from concern to control. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Mr. Harrison, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it carefully before you answer." "All right," I said. "When you first said yes to Ryan moving in, what was the feeling you were trying to hold on to?" "I thought about that." "Evelyn," I said finally. "I was trying to hold on to something that felt like the family she built." Margaret nodded slowly. "And Ryan understood that. He understood exactly what need he was meeting. That is not your weakness, Mr. Harrison. That is your humanity." "But," she leaned forward slightly, "your biggest mistake wasn't trusting your son. Your mistake was believing that love means giving someone unlimited access to your life." I sat with that for a moment. "So, what do I do?" I asked. "We protect you," she said, quietly, completely, and in a way that cannot be undone. There was one more thing I hadn't told her yet. The drawer. 3 days before my appointment with Margaret, I had been looking for a pen in the small desk in the guest room, the room Ryan used as his home office when Lauren wasn't using it. I want to be clear. I was not snooping. I was looking for a pen. But when I opened the middle drawer, there was a manila folder sitting on top, and the tab of that folder had 2 words written on it in my son's handwriting. Estate management. I am 76 years old. I was not born yesterday. I knew what that folder might contain, and I want to tell you that in that moment I had a choice. I could close the drawer. I could tell myself it was probably nothing, probably just research, probably just my son being responsible and forward-thinking. Or I could look. I looked. Inside was a partially completed legal form, a durable power of attorney. My name was already filled in on the form as the principal. Ryan's name was filled in as the agent. He hadn't had it signed. He hadn't filed it. But it was ready. He was waiting for the right moment. Maybe a moment when I seemed confused enough, or dependent enough, or grateful enough to sign away control of my finances, my healthcare decisions, my life. I put the folder back exactly as I'd found it. I closed the drawer. I went back to the kitchen and made lunch. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I told Margaret about the power of attorney document. Her expression didn't change, which told me she wasn't surprised. He can't file that without your signature, she said. You haven't signed it. No, I said. He hasn't shown it to me. Good. Then it's nothing yet. But it tells us something about his timeline. She folded her hands on her desk. Mr. Harrison here is what I'm going to recommend. We don't confront Ryan. We don't alert him. We move quietly, and we move fast. First, we update your will completely. Second, we establish a revocable living trust that removes the house and your major assets from the probate process, which means they cannot be contested easily. Third, we establish a healthcare directive that names someone other than Ryan as your medical decision-maker. Who? I asked. Ryan's all I have. She paused. Do you have anyone else? Old friends? Evelyn's family. I thought about it. Evelyn had a younger sister named Dot who still lived in Eugene. They'd been close. Dot and I had always liked each other. She was 70, sharp as a tack, and had no patience for nonsense. There might be someone, I said. Think about it. Margaret told me. And Mr. Harrison, keep living exactly as you have been. Do not change your behavior. Do not let on. The greatest advantage you have right now is that your son believes he already knows the outcome of this story. She picked up her pen. Let's make sure he's wrong. I drove home that afternoon and pulled into the driveway, and I sat in the car for a minute before going inside. The house looked the same as it always had. The maple tree in the front yard that Evelyn had planted the year Ryan was born. The porch steps Ryan had fixed, the ones he'd fixed because he wanted the property to be in good shape. I understood now, not because he wanted his father to walk safely. The kitchen window I could see from the driveway facing west, positioned exactly where Evelyn had wanted it so she could watch the yard while she did the dishes. I used to think love was the most powerful thing I'd put into this house. I still believe that. But that afternoon, sitting in my car in my own driveway, I understood something new. Love without protection is just hope. And at 76 years old, after everything I had worked for and built and survived, I deserved something better than hope. I got out of the car. I went inside. Ryan was in the kitchen starting dinner. Hey, Dad, he said, turning from the stove with that easy smile. Where have you been? Out, I said pleasantly. Running errands. Anything good? I hung up my coat. Just some things I needed to take care of, I said. And I meant every word. I did not sleep that night, not a single hour. I lay in the dark staring at the ceiling. Evelyn's side of the bed, same as always, and I turned everything over in my mind, the way you turn a piece of damaged wood in your hands, looking for the grain, looking for where the crack started, trying to understand how something that looked solid on the outside had been rotting from within all along. Ryan's voice kept coming back to me. Not the version from the hallway, the one where he thought he was alone. The version from breakfast that same morning. Sleep okay, Dad. Easy, warm, completely natural. The voice of a man who had no idea I had heard every word he said the night before. That was what scared me the most. Not the plan itself, not the power of attorney sitting in that drawer. What scared me was how natural he was, how practiced. How many mornings had we sat across from each other at that table, and I had been looking at a performance without knowing it was one I got up at 5. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, and I drank it slowly, and I thought about Evelyn. She had a saying she used when Ryan was a teenager and testing every boundary he could find. She'd look at me over his head and she'd say quietly, so only I could hear, Walter, don't react. React later. Right now, just watch. I heard her voice as clearly as if she were sitting across from me. Don't react. Watch. All right, Evelyn. All right. By the time Ryan came downstairs at 7, I had already decided on every move I was going to make. I just wasn't going to make any of them yet. He poured his coffee, sat down, looked at me with those hazel eyes that were so much like his mother's it still caught me off guard sometimes. You're up early, he said. Couldn't sleep, I told him. Old bones. He nodded sympathetically. You should mention that to your doctor. Probably worth looking into. I said, you're probably right. And I smiled at my son, and he smiled back. And the distance between what was happening on the surface of that conversation and what was happening underneath it was so enormous that I felt briefly dizzy. But I held it. Because I had a plan now, and the plan required patience. The plan required me to be exactly the man my son thought I was, a trusting old man who had no idea what was coming. Margaret Collins had given me a list, not a written list. She was too careful for that, but a clear sequence of steps laid out in that calm, methodical way she had, like a doctor walking you through a procedure. Step 1. Establish the trust. Step 2. Update the will. Step 3. Identify an alternate healthcare directive agent. Step 4. Do nothing that changes Ryan's perception of the situation until everything is legally secure. The worst thing you can do right now, she had told me, is tip him off. Not because he could stop you. He can't. This is your estate, your decisions. But because if he knows you're aware of his plans, he may accelerate. He may push harder. He may bring other pressure to bear. What kind of pressure? I had asked. She had paused just long enough to tell me she'd seen this before. Emotional pressure, she said. The kind that makes a parent doubt themselves. He may become more attentive, more loving, more present, not because he's changed, but because he's trying to close the gap before you can protect yourself from him. I thought about that on the drive home. I thought about how well I would be able to tell the difference between Ryan genuinely changing and Ryan strategically performing change. I wasn't sure I could. That was a hard thing to sit with, but I sat with it. The next morning, I called Dot. Evelyn's younger sister lived alone in Eugene, about 2.5 hours south. She drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic that she refused to replace because, as she put it, it runs fine and I'm not spending money to impress anyone at my age. She had been widowed herself about 8 years earlier, and she and Evelyn had been the kind of sisters who talked on the phone every week without fail until the very end. When Evelyn died, Dot had stayed with me for the first 2 weeks, and she'd been the one to hold me together in ways that Ryan, for all his presence, somehow hadn't managed. She picked up on the second ring. "Walter," she said. "Everything okay?" "I need to talk to you," I said. "In person, not on the phone." A beat of silence. Dot was not a woman who panicked, but she was also not a woman who missed things. "I can come up Saturday," she said. "Don't tell Ryan," I said. Another pause. Longer this time. "Walter," she said slowly. "What's going on?" "Saturday," I said. "I'll tell you everything Saturday." She came on a Saturday morning when Ryan and Lauren had driven into Portland for what Ryan called a quick errand run, the kind that usually took most of the day. I met Dot at a diner about 4 miles from the house. I got there early and got a corner booth where I could see the door, which I realized afterward was the kind of thing you do when you've started thinking of your own home as a place where you might be overheard. Dot came through the door in her yellow rain jacket, spotted me, and walked straight over with the kind of no-nonsense efficiency that reminded me so much of Evelyn it made my throat tight. She sat down, took her jacket off, flagged the waitress for coffee, and then looked at me with her sister's eyes and said, "All right, talk." So I did. I told her everything: the phone call from the hallway, the power of attorney, the conversations about selling the house, the assisted living facilities Ryan had been researching without asking me, the slow and careful way he had been positioning himself between me and every other part of my life. I told her about Margaret Collins and what we were building together. Dot listened without saying a word until I was finished. Then she picked up her coffee cup, took a slow sip, set it back down, and said, "I always wondered when this was going to happen." I stared at her. "You knew." "I didn't know," she said carefully. "But Ryan, he's always had an eye for what things are worth. Evelyn used to worry about it. She never said it directly, but I know my sister and I know the things she didn't say." She paused. "She loved him. Don't misunderstand me. But she worried." Something shifted in my chest. The particular ache of realizing you've been the last person to understand something that the people around you had already quietly accepted. "She never told me," I said. She didn't want to make you choose, Dot said simply. You know how she was? Yes, I knew how she was. She protected me from the things she thought would hurt me. Right up until the end, she was still doing that. I looked down at my coffee. Margaret wants to name someone else as my healthcare directive agent, I said. Someone other than Ryan. Dot nodded slowly. I was wondering if it might be you, I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Her expression was complicated, not reluctance exactly, but the weight of understanding what she was being asked. You understand what that means, she said. If something happens to you, Ryan is going to come at me with everything he has. I know, I said. I shouldn't have asked. I didn't say no, she said sharply. She put her hand over mine on the table. I said you understand what it means. I want to make sure you're prepared for that too, because Ryan is not going to take this quietly. I looked at her hand on mine. I know, I said. Then yes, she said. Of course yes. Evelyn would want someone to look out for you. That's what I'm going to do. We sat there for a minute, both of us quiet, both of us thinking about the woman who had connected us, who had left a gap in both our lives that we were still 3 years later learning to navigate without her. Then Dot straightened up and said, Order me some eggs. I'm hungry, and I want to hear exactly what Margaret has planned. And for the first time in weeks, I laughed. It felt like something loosening in my chest. It felt like breathing. Back at the house, Ryan and Lauren returned from Portland in the late afternoon. Lauren had shopping bags. Ryan had the particular energy of a man who has spent a day being productive on his own agenda and is feeling good about it. I was in the garage when they pulled up working on the Morris chair, and Ryan came and leaned in the doorway and watched me for a minute. Looking good, he said, nodding at the chair. Getting there, I said. You know, Dad, he started, and I could tell from the tone that this was going to be one of those conversations that started with, you know, and ended somewhere I wasn't going to enjoy. You know you've got a real gift with this stuff. It would be a shame not to, I don't know, have more space to do it. Proper space. I kept my eyes on the wood. I've got plenty of space. Right. I just mean if you were somewhere with a proper workshop set up already, like a facility with dedicated... Ryan, I said mildly. Are you talking about a senior center again? He laughed. Not a senior center, Dad. More like a community. A lifestyle community. I'm 76, I said. I have my lifestyle. I'm living it. He pushed off the doorframe. Okay, Dad, I'm just saying, the option exists. I appreciate you thinking about me, I said. He went back inside. I put my chisel down and pressed my hand flat on the surface of the Morris chair and breathed carefully in and out until the fury passed. Option exists. Lifestyle community. Like he was selling me a condominium instead of trying to dismantle my life. I picked up my chisel. Don't react. Watch. That week I had 3 meetings with Margaret. We moved quickly because Margaret believed in moving quickly once a decision was made. Hesitation is where people get hurt, she told me. The estate plan you have right now was designed for a different time and a different set of circumstances. We're building something new, something airtight. The new will was the centerpiece. Everything changed. When Evelyn and I had written our original wills, the plan had been simple and trusting. The house, the savings, the assets, everything went to Ryan. He was our only child. It had seemed like the obvious natural thing to do. The kind of thing you put on paper, and then don't think about again because your family is your family, and you trust them. I would not be making that mistake twice. What Margaret helped me design instead was what she called a charitable remainder trust. The structure was elegant in the way good solutions usually are. It gave me income from my assets for the rest of my life, protected the house from any claim or contest during my lifetime, and then upon my death directed everything, the house, the savings, the investments, into a foundation. A foundation specifically dedicated to supporting elderly men and women who had been financially exploited or abandoned by family members. I want you to think about that for a moment. Every dollar, every board and beam of that house, all of it going to protect people who had experienced exactly what I was experiencing. People who had not had a Margaret Collins. People who had not had a Dot. People who had been alone when the people they loved looked at them and calculated their value. I signed the papers on a Thursday afternoon. I drove home and made dinner. Ryan said it smelled great and asked if I needed any help. I said, "I've got it. Why don't you set the table?" He set the table. We ate dinner together. I passed him the bread. He told me about a development project that was giving him trouble. I listened. And the whole time, I sat with the knowledge of what I had done that afternoon, and it felt like I was carrying something extraordinary in my chest. Not revenge. That's not the right word. Something more like standing. The feeling of standing upright after someone has been slowly, incrementally trying to push you to your knees. I had stood up, and they had no idea. Friday evening, Lauren found me in the living room reading and sat down across from me with the particular expression she wore when she had something prepared to say. "Walter," she began. She had been calling me Walter lately, which was a small shift from Dad that I had filed away without comment. "Ryan and I have been talking, and we want to be up front with you about something." "All right," I said. I put my book down. "We're concerned," she said. "Not about anything specific, just generally, about your long-term situation, about what happens as time goes on and things become more complicated." "Complicated?" I said. "Physically," she said carefully. "And logistically. This house is a lot, Walter, for one person." "I'm not one person," I said. "You're both here." She gave me a patient smile, the kind that meant she was going to keep going regardless of what I said. "Right, but we can't be here forever. Ryan has his career. I have my career. And eventually, when we're not here, you'd be managing all of this alone. Which we just want to make sure there's a plan." "I have a plan," I said. She blinked. "You do." "I've always had a plan," I said pleasantly. "I spent 45 years running a business, Lauren. I'm not unfamiliar with planning." She recovered quickly. She was good at recovering quickly. "Of course, I didn't mean we just want to be included in whatever that plan looks like, so we can support you." Support me. I looked at my daughter-in-law, and I thought about the word support and what it actually meant versus how it was being used in this conversation, and I felt a cold, clear understanding of exactly how carefully constructed everything she had just said to me was. "I appreciate that," I said. "I'll keep you posted." She left the room. I picked up my book. My hands were absolutely steady. 3 days later, I found out how far Ryan had actually gone. I was on the phone with Bill Dempsey, my accountant of 20 years, for what I had told Ryan was a routine check-in about tax stuff. What Bill actually told me carefully, uncomfortably, like a man delivering news he wasn't sure how to frame, was that Ryan had called him 2 weeks earlier. "He told me he was helping you manage things," Bill said. "Asked some questions about your accounts, your liquidity, what you had in savings versus invested." I was quiet for a moment. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd need your authorization to discuss anything," Bill said. "And then I told him your finances were in good order and he didn't need to worry." Another pause. "Walter is everything all right." "It will be," I said. "Bill, I need you to do something for me. If Ryan calls again, or anyone calling on his behalf, I want you to call me immediately and tell them nothing." "Understood," he said. "I mean nothing, Bill." "Understood completely," he said. I thanked him, and I hung up, and I sat with what I'd just learned. Ryan hadn't just been planning. He had been moving, quietly, carefully testing the edges of what he could access, what he could learn, how much he could know before I ever realized what he was doing. He had called my accountant. My son had called my accountant and tried to get information about my finances without my knowledge. I wanted in that moment to walk into whatever room Ryan was in and say the words that had been building in me for weeks. I wanted to put the truth on the table the way I had imagined it so many times, lay it out flat. Make him look at it, make him say out loud what he had been doing and why, and what he had actually believed would happen. But I didn't, because Margaret's voice was in my head. He may accelerate, he may push harder. Wait until everything is secure, Everything was not yet fully secure. I needed one more week. I could wait one more week. That night, Ryan made popcorn and suggested we watch a movie. He sat on the couch next to me and passed me the bowl and laughed at the right moments, and it was so genuinely comfortable. So much like the father-son evenings I had once taken for granted that I had to remind myself quietly, firmly, like pressing a bruise to remember it's there what I had learned, what Bill had told me, what I had found in that drawer, what I had heard through the half-open door. He's had his time. Now it's our turn. I ate the popcorn, I watched the movie, and I planned. The call came on a Wednesday, Margaret's assistant letting me know that the trust paperwork had been fully processed. The new will had been filed. The healthcare directive naming Dot as my agent was complete and on record. It was done. Every piece of it was in place. I remember sitting in my car in the parking lot of the grocery store where I had taken the call, and I remember the sensation that came over me. Not relief exactly, or not only relief. It was something older and simpler than relief. It was the feeling of having completed something, of having done the work, of having fixed the broken thing. 45 years in that business, I knew what it felt like to finish a repair, to hold a piece of furniture that was solid again, that would hold weight again, that could be trusted again. That was what I felt in that parking lot on a Wednesday afternoon with my groceries in the back seat and my phone in my hand. I had repaired something. Myself, I suppose. My future. My right to a life that belonged to me. I drove home. Ryan was in the kitchen when I walked in. "Hey, Dad," he said. "I was thinking Lauren and I want to take you out to dinner Saturday. Somewhere nice. We found this place in Portland really beautiful, you'd love it." I set my groceries down on the counter. "Saturday," I said. "That sounds nice?" He smiled that warm, hazel-eyed smile that was so much like his mother's. "We just want to celebrate you a little. You've been so good to us letting us stay here. We want to show our appreciation." I looked at my son. I thought about what he didn't know. I thought about the appointment I had scheduled for the following Friday right here at this kitchen table, where I was going to present Ryan with a copy of my updated estate documents. Not to punish him. Not to perform any kind of theater of revenge. But because a man has the right to know where he stands, and I had decided that a week from now my son was going to know exactly where he stood. "Saturday dinner sounds wonderful," I said. "I'm looking forward to it." And I meant it actually. Because it was going to be our last dinner before everything changed. And I had decided I was going to enjoy it. I sat down at the kitchen table and started putting groceries away, and Ryan poured himself a glass of water and asked if I needed anything, and I said no, I was fine, everything was fine. And underneath that ordinary conversation, underneath the groceries and the glass of water and my son's easy smile was the truth that only I was carrying. The house was no longer what he thought it was. The will was no longer what he thought it was. And I was no longer who he thought I was. I was a man who had spent 45 years learning how to be patient with broken things. And I had just finished the most important repair of my life. Saturday dinner was everything Ryan promised it would be. The restaurant was in Portland, one of those places with low lighting and heavy menus and servers who describe each dish like they wrote poetry about it. Ryan had made a reservation weeks in advance, he told me, because the place was hard to get into. Lauren wore a dress I hadn't seen before. Ryan wore a blazer. I wore the sport coat Evelyn had bought me for our 40th anniversary dinner, and had been quietly trying to get me to wear to more things ever since. We had a good table. The food was excellent. Ryan ordered a bottle of wine and made a small toast to Dad and to family, and Lauren clinked her glass against mine and smiled warmly, and the whole thing was so beautifully, perfectly constructed that if I hadn't known what I knew, I would have gone home that night feeling like the luckiest father in Oregon. But I did know what I knew. And so I sat there in Evelyn's anniversary sport coat, and I ate my dinner, and I listened to my son talk about his work, and Lauren talk about a project she was excited about, and I contributed to the conversation in all the right places, and I thought about what was sitting in a manila envelope in the locked drawer of my bedroom desk, and I thought about Friday. Not the following Saturday, not some vague future day. Friday, 6 days from now. The envelope was already prepared. Margaret had printed everything clearly. The new will, the trust documents. A letter I had written myself, not to Ryan, not yet, that came later, but a simple cover note explaining what he was about to read and why. Ryan refilled my wine glass without being asked, the way you do for someone you're fond of. And I thanked him, and I meant the thank you, which is one of the complicated things about loving people who have let you down. The fondness doesn't disappear. You don't stop caring about them. You just stop pretending that caring about someone is the same as trusting them with your life. On the drive home, Ryan said, "Dad, I want to have a conversation with you this week about some plans Lauren and I have been thinking through for your future." I looked out the passenger window. "Of course," I said. "Any time." "Maybe Wednesday," he said. "Wednesday works," I said. Wednesday came. We sat at the kitchen table after dinner, the three of us, coffee cups in hand, and Ryan placed a folder on the table between us with the careful deliberateness of someone who has rehearsed this moment. "We've been doing some research," he began, "about what makes sense logistically, for the house, for your finances, for your care as time goes on. And we want to be proactive about it. Get ahead of things before they become problems." "I appreciate that," I said. He opened the folder. Inside were brochures for 3 different assisted living communities, a printout of what appeared to be a real estate market analysis for my neighborhood, and a 1-page summary that someone, Lauren, I suspected, based on the formatting, had typed up, that outlined what they called transition options. Transition options. I picked up one of the brochures. I looked at it. I set it down. "This one is about 20 minutes from our condo," Lauren said, tapping the brochure on top. "We visited it last week, actually. It's really beautiful. They have a woodworking studio, a garden, organized activities. You'd have your independence, but with support on site." "You visited it," I said. "Just to check it out," Ryan said quickly. "We wanted to be able to describe it properly. We're not saying you have to do anything. We're just laying out what's possible." I looked at the market analysis printout. It had my address at the top. It had comparable sales listed. It had an estimated current market value that made my chest tighten, not because of the number, though the number was significant, but because of what the presence of that document meant. This was not something you print out for a casual conversation about your father's well-being. This was something you print out when you have already begun to think of a building as inventory. "Ryan," I said quietly, "are you planning to sell this house?" He looked surprised. Genuinely, or something close enough to genuinely that I couldn't tell the difference. "No, Dad. This isn't about selling anything. This is about making sure you're taken care of. Because if the goal is for me to move into a facility," I said, keeping my voice level, "then the natural outcome for this property would be a sale, since neither of you would need to live here." A beat. Lauren looked at Ryan. Ryan leaned forward. "Dad, we just want what's best for you. That's all this is." I looked at my son for a long moment. "I know," I said, and I left it there. I left the folder on the table, and I said I was tired, and I was going to bed. Ryan looked slightly deflated, like a man whose well-rehearsed presentation had not landed the way he expected. Lauren gathered the papers back into the folder with efficient hands and said, "Just think about it, Walter. That's all we're asking." I went to bed. I did not sleep. Thursday crawled. I went to the garage in the morning and worked on the Morris chair. Frank, the neighbor I was repairing it for, had stopped by twice to check on the progress, and I had promised him it would be done by the end of the month. I focused on the work the way I always had when my mind needed somewhere to go. Hands moving attention, narrowing the rest of the world, shrinking down to the piece in front of me and what it needed. At lunch, Ryan sat across from me and asked if I'd had any more thoughts about what they'd discussed Wednesday. "Some," I said. And, "I'm still thinking," I said. He nodded. "Take your time, Dad. No pressure. No pressure." While holding a folder with a market analysis of my property and brochures for places to put me. After lunch, I called Dot. She picked up on the first ring. Tomorrow, I said. It's tomorrow. I know, she said. How are you holding up? Fine, I said. I'm fine. Walter. Nervous, I admitted. Not about what I've done, about his face, about what his face is going to look like when he reads it. Dot was quiet for a moment. You're doing the right thing. I know I'm doing the right thing, I said. That doesn't mean it's easy. Nothing worth doing is easy, she said. Evelyn used to say that. She said it about everything from giving birth to parallel parking, I said. Dot laughed. And I laughed. And for a few minutes we talked about Evelyn the way we always talked about Evelyn, not with grief exactly, but with the particular warmth of people who had been loved by the same extraordinary woman and were still every day trying to live up to it. When I hung up, I went and I got the envelope from my desk drawer. I held it in my hands. It was a plain manila envelope. Nothing dramatic about it. My name was on the return address in Margaret's office letterhead. Inside was everything: the new will, the trust summary, a brief explanatory note in my own handwriting, and one other thing I hadn't told Dot about. A letter to Ryan. I had written it 6 days earlier, the night after we went to dinner, sitting at the kitchen table at 2 a.m. while the house was quiet. I had written it by hand, which felt right, and I had written 4 drafts before I had one I could live with. It was not a long letter. It was not angry. It did not list every grievance or catalog every moment I had felt diminished or used or quietly erased. It said 3 things. It said, I know what you planned. It said, I have loved you your entire life without condition or reservation, and I will not stop loving you. But love is not the same as surrender. And it said, I want you to ask yourself honestly, when you look back on these past months, whether the man you were during them is the man your mother raised you to be. That was all. I put the envelope in my coat pocket. Friday morning I woke up at 5 again. I made coffee. I sat at the table. I waited. Ryan came down at 7, same as always. Morning, Dad. Morning. Sleep okay? Fine, I said. Ryan, sit down. I have something for you. He sat. He looked at the envelope I placed on the table between us, without expression, yet just mild curiosity. Lauren was still upstairs. I could hear her on a call through the ceiling. What's this? He said. Open it, I said. He picked it up, turned it over, opened the flap, and pulled out the documents, and I watched his eyes move across the first page, the cover letter from Margaret's office, and I watched the mild curiosity on his face begin to shift into something else. Something more careful. What is this? He said again, but differently this time. It's my estate plan, I said. Updated. He kept reading. He turned to the second page, then the third. I watched him arrive at the section describing the charitable trust. I watched him find the line that said the house upon my death would not transfer to him. I watched his jaw tighten. He looked up. Dad, he said carefully. What did you do? I protected myself. I said, this doesn't. He stopped, looked back at the papers. A charitable trust. Dad, where is this even coming from? Did someone put you up to this? I worked with Margaret Collins, I said. You remember Margaret. She helped your mother and me years ago. Margaret Collins, he repeated, and something in his voice had gone very flat. You went to an attorney without telling me. You went to my accountant without telling me, I said. Silence. Ryan put the papers down on the table. He pressed both hands flat on the surface the way a man does when he needs something solid under him. Bill told you, he said. Bill told me, I said. He said nothing. Ryan? I said. Look at me. He looked at me. I heard you, I said. 3 weeks ago. On the phone in the living room. I was coming down the hall and I heard everything you said. His face went through several things in rapid succession. I watched it happen. Denial assembled itself and then fell apart, And then what came through it underneath it was something that looked for just a second like the face of my son when he was 12 years old and had broken something he knew he shouldn't have touched and was trying to decide whether to admit it. "Dad, you said I'd had my time," I said. "You said now it was your turn." He pushed back from the table, stood up. That was out of context. You don't understand what I was." "I found the power of attorney in your desk," I said. He stopped moving. "The one with my name already filled in as the principal," I said. "The one you hadn't asked me about. The one you were waiting for the right moment to present to me." "What moment were you waiting for, Ryan? What moment would have been right?" He turned away from me, put his hand on the back of his neck. A gesture I recognized from his childhood, the gesture he made when he was caught and knew it, and didn't yet know what to do with that. "I was trying to help," he said, and his voice had something in it now, something rougher. "Everything I was doing was about trying to make sure things were handled properly. That's all it was." "You called a real estate agent about this house," I said, without asking me. He spun back around. "Because this house is going to be a problem eventually, Dad. You can't manage a property this size alone. This neighborhood, do you have any idea what it's worth right now? You're sitting on a multi-million-dollar asset and you don't have a plan for it, and someone has to think about these things." "Someone," I said. "Yes, someone." And now his voice was rising, and I understood that the performance was over. The careful, calibrated presentation was over, and what was coming out now was the real thing. Someone who is your family. Someone who has been here showing up, doing the work, trying to plan ahead, while you just trust everyone and assume everything will work out, because it always has, because that's how you've always been. And that's fine, Dad. It's fine, but someone has to be practical. "Practical," I said quietly. "Yes, practical. Realistic. About what happens in 5 years, in 10 years. About the fact that you are 76 years old and you are not going to live here forever, and someone needs to have a plan for what comes after, and if that person is going to be me, then I need information. I need access. I need to be able to act when the time comes." "The time comes," I said. "You mean when I'm dead?" He stopped. The word landed in the room like something physical. "Or incapacitated," he said, quieter now. "Or confused, or unable to manage things. That's all I meant." "Is it?" I said. He didn't answer. From upstairs I heard Lauren's call end. I heard her footsteps above us moving toward the stairs. We both heard it. Ryan looked at me and something shifted in his face. He picked the documents back up. He turned to the page describing the foundation, the charitable trust, the mission statement I had helped Margaret draft about protecting elderly people who had been exploited or abandoned by family. I watched him read it. I watched him understand what it meant. Not just that the money was going somewhere else, but where it was going, and why. "You're telling me I'm the reason you did this," he said. "The foundation will help people in exactly the situation I found myself in," I said. "I thought that was appropriate." He set the papers down. For a long moment, he didn't say anything at all. Lauren came into the kitchen, read the energy of the room in about half a second, and looked between us. "What's going on?" Ryan didn't look at her. "He changed everything," he said. "The will, the house, all of it. It's all going to a charity." Lauren's eyes went to the documents on the table. I watched her face do what faces do when a future that felt certain suddenly isn't. "Walter," she said carefully, "I think there may have been some misunderstanding about what Ryan and I were trying to—" "Lauren," I said gently, "I found the power of attorney. I know about the real estate agent. I know Ryan called my accountant. There is no misunderstanding." She looked at Ryan. Ryan was looking at the table. The silence stretched. And then Ryan said something I had not expected. He said, "I wanted to be free, Dad." I looked at him. "I know that sounds terrible," he said. "I know how it sounds. But we've been, Lauren, and I have been struggling. Financially. For years. And I looked at this house, and I looked at what you had, and I thought—" He stopped, started again. I thought when the time came, when everything eventually came to me, we'd finally be able to breathe. I had it all planned out. The renovation, the sale, what we'd do with the money. And I know that's wrong. I know now standing here hearing myself say it out loud that it's wrong. But I didn't let myself see it that way. I told myself I was being responsible. I told myself I was planning for the family's future. The kitchen was very quiet. And then when I heard your voice just now, he said, saying the things I said out loud back to me, I heard my mother. I heard what she would have said. And I couldn't. His voice broke, actually broke the first real crack in everything. I couldn't figure out how to be both things at once. The son she raised, and the person I've become. I looked at my son. His eyes were wet. Lauren had her hand over her mouth. I thought about what Margaret had told me, what Dot had told me, what Evelyn had not told me because she was protecting me from it. I thought about the boy I had driven to baseball practice, the teenager I had stayed up with during exams, the man who had held me up at his mother's funeral when I thought I might not stay upright. I thought about the sentence, he's had his time, now it's our turn. And I thought about the sentence before it, the one I had never quite let myself hear until this moment. I wanted to be free. My son had looked at his future and seen himself still waiting, still tethered, still measuring his life against the clock of mine, and the weight of that had curdled into something ugly. I am not excusing it. I want to be absolutely clear about that. What he did was wrong. What he planned was a betrayal. The power of attorney, the real estate agent, the careful, systematic dismantling of my autonomy. None of that becomes acceptable because he had a reason for it. But I am 76 years old. I have lived long enough to know that people are rarely only one thing. I stood up from the table. I reached into the envelope one more time and I pulled out the letter, the handwritten one, the one that had taken 4 drafts and a sleepless night, and I put it on the table in front of Ryan. Read this, I said. Not now, tonight, when you're alone. He looked at it, looked at me. What does it say? It says what I should have said to you a long time ago, I said, and what your mother would have said too if she'd had the chance. I picked up my coffee cup. I'm going out to the garage, I said. The Morris chair isn't going to finish itself. And I walked out. Behind me, I heard Lauren say something in a low voice. I heard Ryan say something back. I didn't catch the words. I didn't need to. I went to the garage, and I picked up my tools, and I went back to work on the chair. My hands were absolutely steady. 30 minutes later, I heard the back door open. I heard footsteps. Ryan appeared in the garage doorway, same as he had before, leaning against the frame. But he looked different than the last time he had stood there. He looked smaller somehow. Not in a diminished way. In a human way. In the way that people look when they have stopped performing. Dad, he said. I'm listening, I said without putting down my tools. I read the letter. I looked up. His eyes were red. I'm sorry, he said. I don't have a way to say it that makes it enough, but I'm sorry. I looked at my son for a long moment. I know you are, I said. What happens now, he said. With the house, with us. The house is protected, I said. That doesn't change. What I've put in place, Margaret's documents, the trust that stays. Because I'm not going to dismantle my protection on the basis of one conversation, no matter how honest it is. He nodded. He looked like he wanted to argue and was choosing not to. As for us, I said, that depends on you. Not on what you say to me in the next 5 minutes. On what you do, over time. Whether the man you are in a year and 5 years is someone who deserved to have Evelyn Harrison for a mother. His jaw worked. That's a high bar, he said quietly. She was a remarkable woman, I said. A beat. And then quietly he said, yeah, she was. We stood there, my son and I, in the garage of the home I built with his mother, and neither of us said anything for a while. But it wasn't the silence of distance. It was the silence of 2 people who had just said true things, and were sitting with the weight of them, which is a different thing entirely. Eventually, I went back to the Morris chair, and Ryan stood there and watched me work for a few minutes, the way he used to do when he was small, and the garage was a kind of magic to him, a place where broken things came back to life. Then he said, "Can I help?" I looked at him. I handed him a piece of sandpaper. "Start on the left arm," I said. "Go with the grain." He took the sandpaper. He went with the grain. And we worked in silence, my son and I, on a broken thing that was beginning slowly to become whole. The sandpaper moment lasted about 20 minutes. Ryan worked quietly on the left arm of the Morris chair while I worked on the seat back, and neither of us tried to fill the silence with anything that didn't belong in it. That surprised me, actually. I had expected him to talk. Ryan had always been a talker. Even as a boy, he processed things out loud, filled every quiet space with words, the way some people fill empty rooms with furniture. But that afternoon in the garage, he was different. Quieter. Like a man who had just heard something that required him to be still for a while. When we finished for the day, he handed me back the sandpaper without a word and went inside. I stood in the garage alone for a few minutes, turning a woodblock over in my hands, not doing anything with it, just holding it. I didn't know what came next. That's the honest truth. I had spent so many weeks focused on protecting myself, on the mechanics of the trust, the will, the documents, the steps that I hadn't thought far enough past the confrontation to know what the day after it was supposed to look like. I had protected myself. Now, I had to figure out what I was protecting myself for. That question kept me company the rest of that Friday evening. Ryan and Lauren were quiet at dinner. Not hostile quiet, stunned quiet. The kind of quiet that settles over people when the version of the future they had been living inside has just dissolved and they haven't yet built a new one to replace it. Lauren barely spoke. Ryan pushed his food around. I ate normally, or close to normally, and I asked about the weather forecast for the weekend and whether anyone wanted more bread, and the ordinariness of those questions in that atmosphere felt almost surreal. After dinner, Lauren said she was going upstairs. She touched Ryan's shoulder as she passed him lightly with a kind of gentleness I hadn't seen from her in months. Ryan watched her go and then looked at me. "She's not a bad person," he said. "I want you to know that." "I don't think she is," I said. "She was scared," he said. "We both were. We handled it wrong." "You handled it very wrong," I said. He winced. "Yeah. Calling my accountant behind my back," I said. "Contacting a real estate agent, filling out a power of attorney with my name on it without asking me." "I know, Dad. Those aren't small things, Ryan." "I know that." He met my eyes. "I know." I let that sit for a moment. "What were you actually going to do?" I asked. "With the power of attorney, what was the plan?" He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I don't know if I had a plan, not a real one. I think I wanted to have it, the option, the ability to act if I needed to, or if I decided I needed to." He paused. "Which I understand now is exactly the problem. Because who decides when someone else needs something done to their life?" "Exactly," I said. "I told myself it was love," he said. "I told myself I was being a responsible son, taking care of things, planning ahead." And there was probably some of that in it genuinely. But there was also— He stopped again. "Say it," I said. "There was also the fact that your life is worth a lot of money," he said. "And I wanted some of it, and I was trying to find a way to make that feel okay." The room was very quiet. I had waited weeks to hear my son say something true. I hadn't expected it to hurt this much even when it came. "Thank you," I said, "for saying that." He looked at me. "Thank you for making me." That night I didn't sleep again, but for different reasons than before. Not fear, not vigilance, not the cold calculation of a man making contingency plans. Something else, something harder to name. The particular insomnia of a person who has been through a significant thing and is still absorbing it, the way ground absorbs rain slowly from the surface down. I thought about Ryan at 8 years old, standing at my workbench, watching me repair a chair, not unlike the Morris chair, asking me with genuine wonder how I knew what the wood needed. I had told him, you listen, you pay attention. Wood tells you things if you're willing to be quiet enough to hear them. I thought about Ryan at 17, sitting across from me at this same kitchen table the night before his college entrance exams, terrified in the specific way of a smart kid who has always been told he has potential and is now being asked to prove it. I had sat with him until midnight. We hadn't talked about the exams. We had talked about baseball, about a movie we'd both seen, about a story Evelyn had told at dinner that made us both laugh. And when he finally went to bed, he said, "Thanks, Dad." And I had understood even then that what he was thanking me for wasn't advice or strategy. It was just presence. Just being there. I thought about Ryan at 32 sitting across from me in this same kitchen telling me he was proposing to Lauren, his whole face lit up with the specific joy of a man who has decided on something and feels right about it. And I had shaken his hand and then pulled him into a hug because he was my son and he was happy, and there was nothing more complicated than that. Where does a person go from that to what he had almost done? I didn't have the answer. I'm not sure there is one answer. I think people drift incrementally in small, reasonable steps, each of which seems defensible on its own, until one day they look up and find themselves somewhere they never consciously decided to go. I think Ryan had made a series of individually small choices that had added up to something large and harmful, and I think he had told himself at each step that he was being practical, being adult, being realistic, because the alternative, admitting that he was letting money override his love for his father, was something he couldn't look at directly. I understood that. I didn't excuse it, but I understood it. Saturday morning arrived, and with it came something I had not anticipated. Lauren knocked on my bedroom door at 8 before Ryan was even up. I said, "Come in," and she came in and stood near the door with her arms crossed, not aggressively, but protectively, the way people hold themselves when they feel exposed. "Can I talk to you?" she said. "Sit down," I said. She sat on the chair near the window. I was still in bed, propped up on pillows, which should have made this awkward, but somehow didn't. "I owe you an apology," she said. "A real one. Not a diplomatic one." "All right," I said. "I drove a lot of this," she said. "I want to be honest about that. Ryan would have been more passive without me. The research, the facility tours, the way we framed things to you, that was mostly me." I looked at her carefully. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you deserve to know the truth," she said. "And because Ryan has been taking the full weight of it, and that's not fair either. We did this together." I studied her face. Lauren had always been hard to read, that polished exterior that processed everything quickly and gave little away. But sitting in my bedroom chair at 8 in the morning, without her composure fully in place, she looked younger. She looked actually a little frightened. "Were you struggling as badly as he said?" I asked. "Financially?" She exhaled, a long, slow exhale that told me the answer before she gave it. "Worse," she said. "We have debt that Ryan that he minimizes even to himself. The condo, the cars, his business investments, that didn't work out the way he hoped. We've been managing appearances for a long time. And when his mother died, and we started thinking about what you had, what the house was worth, what the estate would eventually..." She stopped. "It started to feel like a solution. That's terrible. I know that's terrible." "It is," I said. "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right now. I'm just asking you to know the truth, because I can't keep sitting in this house watching Ryan carry the guilt for both of us." I was quiet for a moment. "Lauren," I said, "do you love my son?" She blinked, like the question surprised her. "Yes," she said. "Genuinely." "Then the most useful thing you can do right now," I said, "is make sure that the two of you go get some help. Financial counseling. Couples counseling if you need it. Whatever it takes to stop running from the actual problem and start dealing with it." She nodded slowly. "The debt isn't going to disappear because this house sold. I said. Whatever you imagined getting from my estate, it would have been gone within 3 years. The pattern that created the debt would have just continued with better materials. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said something that told me more than anything else she could have said that she was being honest with me. "I know," she said. "I knew that. I just didn't want to know it." Ryan came downstairs an hour later to find Lauren and me at the kitchen table with coffee talking about Evelyn. Not about the estate, not about the future. About Evelyn, a story Lauren had never heard about the time Evelyn had organized an entire neighborhood fundraiser in 48 hours because a family on our street had a house fire, and how she had somehow managed to source furniture, clothing, and 3 months of groceries without anyone understanding how. Ryan stood in the doorway watching us for a moment. Then he poured himself coffee and sat down. And we told him the story. He laughed in the right places. And that laughter was real. I know my son's real laugh. I've known it for 44 years. And for a little while the kitchen felt like something close to what it had felt like in the first month before everything curdled, when I had thought this arrangement was going to save me from loneliness. But things had changed. And we all knew it. And pretending otherwise wasn't something any of us were willing to do anymore. That afternoon, Ryan asked to use the garage, not to help me. He asked if he could just be in there alone with some wood and the basic tools. He said he wanted to try to make something. I said yes. I sat in the house and read, and through the window I could hear the occasional sound of sawing of something being worked, of my son doing with his hands what I had spent my whole life teaching him hands could do. He was in there for 3 hours. He came in at dinner time with sawdust on his shirt and a small, rough, completely imperfect wooden box in his hands. "It's not good," he said, setting it on the kitchen table. "I know it's not good." I picked it up, turned it over. The joints were uneven. The lid sat slightly crooked. One of the corners had a small split where the wood had been pushed rather than guided. "What were you trying to make?" I asked. "A jewelry box," he said. "For Mom. I know she's gone. I wanted to make something for her." I set the box down on the table. "I am going to tell you something honestly. I am a man who has kept himself together through a great deal in the last several years. I held myself together through Evelyn's diagnosis, and her treatment, and her death, and the funeral, and the first terrible empty year afterward. I held myself together through the discovery of my son's plan, and the weeks of quiet strategy, and the confrontation at the kitchen table, and the conversation in the garage. I did not hold myself together when Ryan put that imperfect wooden box on my kitchen table and told me he'd made it for his mother. I sat down. And I cried. Not quietly, not dignified, not the controlled kind of grief that looks acceptable from the outside. The real kind. The kind that comes from somewhere below strategy and planning and survival, from the place where you keep the things you don't know how to protect. Ryan sat down across from me. He didn't say anything. He didn't try to fix it. He just stayed there while his father fell apart a little, which was... I realized the most present he had been since he'd arrived in October. When I was done, I wiped my face with a dish towel, like the undignified 76-year-old man I am. "She would have loved it," I said. "The box, crooked lid and all." "I know," he said. "She was like that." "She was exactly like that," I said. We sat there for a minute. Then Ryan said, "Dad, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." "When have I been anything else?" I said. A small, almost smile. "True." He folded his hands on the table. "Is there any version of this where we can actually fix it between us? Is that something you think is possible? Or have I used that up?" I looked at my son. "You haven't used it up," I said. "But I need you to understand something. Forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. I can forgive you, and I think I already am, whether I want to or not, because you're my son, and that's how this works. But trust is going to take time. A long time. And it's going to be built the same way everything worth having gets built." "Slowly," he said. "With patience," I said. "And attention. and with the understanding that if you quit halfway through, you end up with something worse than what you started with. He nodded. "I'm not quitting," he said. "I know," I said. 3 days later, Ryan and Lauren moved back to Portland. It was a Sunday. They packed their things efficiently without drama, without any of the negotiation or argument I had half expected. Lauren hugged me at the door and said, "I meant what I said Saturday." I told her I knew. Ryan loaded the last box into the car and then came back to where I was standing on the porch, and we looked at each other for a moment. "Call me," I said. "Every week," he said. "Not about the house," I said. "Not about the house." He agreed. I watched the car back out of the driveway. I watched it turn onto the street and disappear. And then I stood there on the porch in the quiet of my own house, my completely legally, irrevocably protected house, and I breathed. The following week was strange. The house felt big again the way it had after Evelyn died, but differently big. Not the empty because someone is gone kind of big, the mine again kind of big. I walked through each room, and I felt for the first time in months that I was moving through my own space rather than living carefully around other people's plans for it. I called Bill Dempsey and updated him fully on what had happened and what the new legal structure looked like. He listened, asked a few precise questions, and then said, "Walter, I have to say I'm impressed. A lot of people in your situation would have just waited and hoped." "Hoping is not a strategy," I told him. "Margaret Collins would agree with you," he said. I called Margaret to thank her. She said, "Don't thank me yet. The real work is what comes after the documents. The documents are just the foundation. What you build on them is up to you." I thought about that for a long time after I hung up. The real work is what comes after. Ryan called that Wednesday. Not about the house. He called to tell me about a problem at work, a development deal that was going sideways, and he wanted to think through it out loud. We talked for 40 minutes. I gave him my opinion, and he pushed back on part of it, and I told him he might be right, and he said he might not be, and we went back and forth, and it was a real conversation. The kind we used to have before things got complicated. When we were wrapping up, he said, "I started seeing someone, a therapist." I waited. "I want to understand why I made the choices I made," he said, "because I don't want to be the person who made those choices. And I don't think you can just decide not to be that person. I think you have to understand how you got there first." "I think that's right," I said. "She asked me about you," he said. "First session. She asked me to describe you, and I said you were the most patient man I'd ever known. And then she asked me why if I knew that I had assumed you wouldn't see what I was doing." He paused. I didn't have an answer. "What do you think the answer is?" I said. Quiet on the line. "I think I needed you to not see it," he said. "Because if you saw it and still didn't say anything, it meant I could keep going. And if you didn't see it, it meant I was the smart one. Either way, I got to keep my story about myself." I sat with that. "That's a hard thing to figure out about yourself," I said. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, it is." 2 weeks after Ryan and Lauren moved out, I had lunch with Frank, the neighbor whose Morris chair I had finally finished. I brought it over in my truck, and we carried it inside together and put it in his living room. And Frank sat in it and said it was better than new, which is the best thing anyone has ever said to me about any piece of furniture I have ever repaired. We had sandwiches at his kitchen table. Frank was 81, a retired high school principal, and he had known Evelyn and me for 20 years. He was one of the people Ryan had subtly tried to reduce my access to in the months of careful management. Ryan had once said, "You don't need to drive all the way out there, Dad," about a standing lunch Frank and I had been having for 15 years. I told Frank a version of what had happened, not everything. Enough. He listened without interrupting, which is the thing I have always valued most about Frank. When I finished, he said, "How are you doing, honestly?" "Honestly," I said. "Please," he said. "I'm heartbroken and relieved in equal measure," I said. "And I'm angry in a way that I don't know what to do with yet. And I miss Evelyn so much it physically hurts sometimes because she would have known exactly what to say to Ryan and I can only guess." Frank nodded slowly. "And underneath all of that," I said, "I feel something I haven't felt in months." "What?" he said. "Like myself," I said. "I feel like myself again." Frank picked up his sandwich. "Good," he said. "Stay that way." The next call from Ryan came on a Friday 3 weeks after they'd moved out. And this one was different from the beginning because his voice when I picked up had something sharp in it. Not anger. Something more like urgency. "Dad," he said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to not say anything until I've finished." "All right," I said. "Lauren and I have been talking," he said. "Really talking, with the counselor and without her. And we've decided to sell the condo." I didn't say anything. "We've been living above our means for years," he said. "You were right about that. The debt it's real, and it's not going away by pretending it isn't there. We're going to downsize. We found an apartment we can actually afford. And I've been talking to someone about restructuring the business debt." I let him finish. "Okay," I said. "Okay," he said. "What do you want me to say, Ryan?" "I don't know," he said. "That you think it's the right call, maybe." "I think it's the right call," I said. "I think it's the first genuinely right call you've made in about a year." A beat. "That stings," he said. "It's true," I said. "I know," he said. Then, "Dad, there's something else." I waited. "The therapist asked me to write a letter to Mom," he said, "as an exercise, about who I've been this past year versus who she raised me to be." "That sounds like a useful exercise," I said carefully. "It was the hardest thing I've ever written," he said. "Harder than any business document, any deal, anything. Because I had to actually say it. That I let her down. That I let you down. That I had her voice in my head for months telling me something was wrong, and I kept turning the volume down." I said nothing. "I cried," he said, "writing it. I'm telling you that because I want you to know it wasn't academic. It wasn't just a therapy exercise. It was real." "I believe you," I said. "I know the will isn't changing," he said. "I'm not calling about that. I want you to know I'm not calling about that." "I know," I said. "The foundation," he said, "that you set up. For elderly people who've been in situations like yours. I want to volunteer. If they'd take me. I know how that sounds coming from me, but I want to do something real, not to change what's in the documents. Just to, I don't know how to explain it. To become the person your mother thought you already were," I said. Silence. "Yeah," he said softly. "Yeah, exactly that." I was quiet for a moment. "I'll give you Margaret's contact information," I said. "The foundation is connected to her office. They can tell you what they need." "Okay," he said. "Ryan." "Yeah, your mother didn't think you were a finished product," I said. "She thought you were a person in progress. That's different. She had high expectations because she believed you were capable of meeting them, not because she thought you already had." A long pause. "I wish she was here," he said. "So do I said. "Every single day." We stayed on the line for another few minutes without saying much, and that was all right. Sometimes the connection itself is the thing, not the words that move along it. When we hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a while. The afternoon light came through the window the way it always had, the way Evelyn had positioned it to come through, falling across the kitchen table in that particular way that had been part of my life for nearly 40 years. I thought about what Margaret had said to me in her office weeks ago, now that felt like a different lifetime. The real work is what comes after. I was beginning to understand what she meant. Because the documents were filed. The house was protected. The will was sealed. All of that was done. But Ryan was still my son, and I was still his father. And whatever we were going to build between us now, if we were going to build something, was going to take every bit of the patience I had spent 45 years developing in a garage with broken furniture and stubborn wood, and the quiet, reliable knowledge that some things take time to become what they were always meant to be. I got up from the table. I put my coffee cup in the sink. I went to the garage. There was a rocking chair in the corner that had been waiting for me since the fall. A beautiful old thing, solid oak with a cracked spindle and a seat that needed recaning. I had been putting it off because some repairs are like that. They require a particular kind of readiness before you can do them properly. I stood in front of it. I put my hands on it. I began. The rocking chair took me 6 weeks, not because it was the most complicated repair I had ever done. Technically, it wasn't. The cracked spindle was straightforward to replace, and the recaning, while time-consuming, was work my hands knew by feel after decades of the same motion. It took 6 weeks because I kept stopping. I would work for an hour and then sit back and just look at it, and I would think, and the thinking would take me somewhere, and by the time I came back, the afternoon was gone. I had never been a man who sat still easily. Evelyn used to say that about me. Walter could build a house before he could sit through a movie. And she was not wrong. My whole life, the antidote to difficult emotions had been work. Make something, fix something, keep the hands busy, and let the mind sort itself out in the background. But that winter, for the first time in my life, I found I needed the stillness more than the motion. Ryan called every week. Wednesday evenings reliably, the way he used to call on Sunday mornings before everything changed. The calls were not long, usually 20 minutes, sometimes 30. He told me about the new apartment, smaller but manageable in a neighborhood he said was actually more interesting than where they'd been. He told me about the business restructuring, slow progress, 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but progress. He told me about the therapy, not in detail, but enough that I understood he was doing the real work, not the performative kind. I listened. I asked questions. I gave opinions when asked and kept them to myself when I wasn't. It was not the relationship we had before all of this. I want to be honest about that. Something had shifted, and I knew with the pragmatism of a man who has spent a lifetime working with real materials that certain shifts are permanent. You can repair a piece of wood that is cracked under pressure. You can make it strong again, stronger sometimes if you do the work right. But the grain of the wood will carry the memory of the crack. That's not a flaw. That's just truth. Our relationship would carry the memory of what happened. I had decided that was all right. The foundation that Margaret had helped me establish began accepting grant applications in February. I had named it the Evelyn Harrison Foundation, which Margaret had gently suggested might be too personal, and I had told her that personal was exactly what I intended. It would support elderly individuals who had experienced financial exploitation at the hands of family members. It would fund legal assistance counseling, emergency housing, in situations where someone had been displaced. It would do the concrete, practical work of helping people who had no Margaret Collins, no Dot, no 20 years of business instincts to fall back on. The response in the first month surprised me. Margaret called me on a Thursday morning, her voice carrying something I had not heard in it before, a kind of moved quality, as if she was working to keep herself composed. "Walter," she said, "we have received 47 inquiries in the first 3 weeks. 47 people who reached out about the Foundation's services or about sharing their story." I sat down. 47, I said. "Many of them are your age or older," she said. "Many of them are women whose children held power of attorney and used it badly. Some are men whose families put them in facilities they didn't choose and then liquidated everything. One woman was 83 years old and had been living in her daughter's guest room for 2 years without access to her own bank account." I did not say anything for a moment. "This is happening everywhere," I said. "Everywhere," Margaret confirmed. "And most of them have no idea they have any recourse. They think because it's family there's nothing to be done. They think because they love their children accepting the situation is the only option." I thought about standing in my own hallway listening to my son discuss the timeline of my removal from my own life. I thought about all the people who had stood in their own hallways, or their own guest rooms, or their own spaces that had been slowly colonized by someone else's plans, and had not had the 45 years of business instincts and the good fortune of a Margaret Collins to show them what options existed. "What do they need most?" I asked. "Right now," she said. "Someone to tell them their story matters, that they are not imagining it, that what is happening to them has a name and a legal remedy, and they deserve to fight for themselves. Then let's make sure they know that, I said. That conversation changed the direction of the next 12 months of my life more significantly than almost anything else that had happened. I began volunteering at the foundation 2 days a week. Not in a legal capacity. I was a furniture repairman from Portland, not a lawyer, but in the capacity I actually had. I sat with people. I listened. I told them my story, the parts that were useful, the parts that might make them feel less alone. I drove to a community center in a town about an hour away, where a group of 12 older adults met every other Tuesday, most of them dealing in some variation with what I had dealt with, and I sat in a folding chair in a beige room, and I talked and listened and talked some more. I met a woman named Gloria, 78, whose son had moved her out of her home of 40 years into a one-bedroom apartment for her safety, and then rented her house to strangers without her knowledge. I met a man named Harold, 82, whose daughter had told him he was getting confused so consistently and so strategically that he had genuinely begun to doubt his own mind before a neighbor helped him access legal assistance. I met a woman named Patricia, 74, whose situation was so close to my own that the first time she told me her story, I had to excuse myself to get some water and stand in the hallway for 2 minutes breathing carefully. These people became real to me in the way that only people can become real when you sit across from them in a beige room and watch them try to find the words for something shameful and painful and confusing. And something happened to me in those rooms that I had not expected. I started to heal, not from Ryan. That healing was happening on its own schedule week by week. Wednesday, call by Wednesday call, slow and real. But from something older and quieter that I hadn't fully named. The particular wound of feeling disposable, of having looked into my son's eyes across a kitchen table and seen behind the warmth a calculation. That wound had been sitting in me since December, since the hallway, since the phone call, and the power of attorney and all the rest of it, and I had been managing it, working around it, building my legal protections and my practical defenses while carrying this thing underneath. Sitting with Gloria and Harold and Patricia and the others, I found that the wound had company. And company, I discovered, is one of the most powerful medicines there is. March arrived, and with it something I genuinely had not anticipated. Ryan asked if he could visit. Not with Lauren. Just him. He called on a Wednesday, same as always, and at the end of the call he said, "Dad, I want to come up. Not for a weekend, just one day. I want to see you. And I want to see the house." I was quiet for a moment. "The house," I said. "Not like that," he said quickly. "I just mean it's been 3 months. I miss it. I grew up there. I want to—" He stopped. "I want to stand in the garage and remember what it felt like when I was 10 years old and you were teaching me to use a hand plane, and I felt like knowing how to do that meant I could do anything." I held the phone for a moment. "Come Saturday," I said. He arrived mid-morning. I heard the car in the driveway, and I stayed in the kitchen at the table with coffee, and I let him come to me. Not as a test. Just because I wasn't sure what I would feel when I saw him, and I wanted to be sitting down when I found out. He came through the back door, same as he always had his whole life, the way people enter the houses they grew up in, as if the specific door is a memory as much as an entrance. He looked thinner than he had in December. And there was something different about the way he carried himself, a solidity and a self-consciousness. At the same time, the particular posture of a man who has been looking at himself honestly and doesn't entirely like everything he's found, but is choosing to look anyway. "Hey, Dad," he said. "Hey," I said. "Coffee's fresh." He poured himself a mug and sat across from me, and we sat there for a minute the way we used to sit before the performance of it had become the point, and it felt like not like before. I want to be clear, not like before, but like a new version of something. Like a repair that hasn't become the original again, but has become something solid in its own right. "How are you?" he said. "Good," I said. "Really good, actually. The foundation is taking up a lot of my time and energy, and I mean that entirely as a compliment to it." He nodded. "I reached out to Margaret's office," he said, "about volunteering. They put me on a waiting list. I looked at him. They have a lot of people wanting to help, he said, slightly defensive. I'm not judging, I said. I'm glad. I want to earn it, he said. Not from you. I know I can't buy my way back to where we were, and I'm not trying to. I want to earn the right to say I did something that mattered with what happened. That I didn't just hurt you, and then go back to my regular life. I picked up my coffee. Tell me about the apartment, I said. His face shifted the particular relief of a topic that is difficult being set aside not forever, but for now. He told me about the apartment. Smaller than the condo, a third-floor walk-up, a coffee shop across the street, that he and Lauren had made their Saturday morning ritual. He told me Lauren had taken on a new client that was going well. He told me the business restructuring was cleaner than he'd expected once he stopped trying to make it look like something it wasn't. He talked for about 20 minutes. Then he said, "Can I go to the garage?" "It's your garage too," I said. "It always has been." He was out there for an hour. I did not follow him. I stayed in the kitchen and read the newspaper. An actual paper. Newspaper, one of my last consistent indulgences. And I let him have whatever he needed to have in that space. When he came back in, his eyes were red but his face was composed. "The Morris chair looks incredible," he said. "Frank must love it." "He does," I said. "Calls it the throne." Ryan laughed. Real laugh. The one I had known for 44 years. We had lunch at the kitchen table. I made sandwiches, same as I always had when he was a kid, and we ate and talked about nothing of particular consequence. A documentary I had watched, a book he was reading, a story about one of the people from the Tuesday group at the community center that I told him without names. He listened carefully to that one. When I finished, he said, "What you're doing with the foundation? With the group? That's Dad. That's something Mom would have organized in 48 hours and still had time to bake a pie." "Don't give me too much credit," I said. "I'm just showing up." "Showing up is everything," he said. That hit me somewhere I wasn't expecting, because it was true. And because it was what I had been failing to say to Ryan for a long time, not in these words, but in all the choices I had made in the years before this one, all the ways I had quietly accepted diminishment, rather than saying, clearly, "I am here, I am present, I am not a problem to be solved or an asset to be managed. Showing up is everything." He left at 4. At the door we hugged. I am not a man who has always been comfortable with physical affection. Evelyn used to joke that I came from a long line of men who patted each other firmly on the back and called it intimacy. But I held my son for a moment longer than a pat, and he held me back, and it was not everything we'd lost, and it was not nothing. "Same time next month," he said. "Same time next month," I said. I watched the car pull out of the driveway. I went to the garage. The rocking chair was finished by then. Had been finished for a week, sitting in the corner with a clean coat of finish on it, the new spindle blending seamlessly into the old ones, the recaned seat tight and even. I had been meaning to call the owner to come pick it up, a woman named Helen from 3 streets over, who had owned the chair for 50 years and whose late husband had sat in it every evening of their married life. I sat in it instead, just for a minute. I sat in a chair that had belonged to a life I had not lived, in the space that had always been mine, and I felt the particular solidity of a well-built thing that has been repaired with care. Summer came. The foundation grew faster than I had expected. Margaret brought on a part-time coordinator, a woman in her 30s named Carla, who had a master's in social work and the organizational capacity of someone who had been doing this work for decades. With Carla managing the practical infrastructure, I was free to do what I was actually good at, which was sitting with people and telling the truth. I moved in June. I want to stop here because this part surprises people when I tell it. After everything, the months of fighting to stay in the house, the legal structures built to protect it, the confrontation at the kitchen table about what it meant and who it belonged to, I chose to leave it. Not because Ryan pressured me. He didn't. Not because of anything that had happened in the fall and winter. I made this decision alone in April, sitting in the garden one afternoon, and the decision surprised me as I was making it. I was 76 years old. The house was 4 bedrooms. I had lived in it for nearly 40 years, and I loved it with a love that was bound up with Evelyn and the life we had made there and the family we had tried to be. But I was also sitting in that garden in April, aware that I had spent the last 6 months fighting for the right to stay in a place that was, if I was honest with myself, too large, too quiet, and too full of a version of my life that was no longer the version I was living. I had fought for the house because it was mine and my right to decide its fate. Now I was deciding. I found a small house near the coast. Not a facility, not a community with organized activities and staff on site. A house. 3 rooms, a good-sized garage workshop, a porch that faced west. 20 minutes from the ocean. A town small enough that you run into people you know at the grocery store, which at 76 is something I had come to understand was not a minor consideration. I called Margaret before I listed the house for sale. She said, "The trust structure is flexible. The assets can be redirected. The foundation continues regardless." That's what I needed to know, I said. I called Ryan second. There was a silence on the line when I told him. Then he said, "Are you sure? Very?" I said. "Is this Dad? Is this because of—" "It's not because of you," I said. "It's because I want to. Because I'm 76 and I want to live near the ocean and have a workshop that's mine and wake up every morning in a place that feels like the next chapter instead of the last one." Another silence. "Okay," he said. And then quietly, "Is it near enough that I could drive up?" "About 2 hours from Portland," I said. "That's nothing," he said. "That's what I thought," I said. I sold the house in August. The buyers were a young couple with 2 small children and a dog. The wife was pregnant. The husband had the look of a man who had just done something enormous and was still catching up to the reality of it. I shook their hands at the closing. I did not feel what I expected to feel. I expected grief. Some of it was there, yes, a current of it underneath everything else. But what was on top was something lighter and more surprising. I felt free. I moved on a Saturday. Dot came to help, which meant she supervised energetically, while I told her I could manage fine, and she ignored me and organized the kitchen with the precision of a woman who has never met a drawer she couldn't improve. "She would have loved this," Dot said, standing at the window of the new kitchen, looking out toward the direction of the water, even though you couldn't see it from here. "The ocean. Evelyn always wanted to live near the ocean." "I know," I said. "That's why I chose it." Dot turned and looked at me with her sister's eyes. "Good," she said simply. "The workshop was the first room I made entirely mine. I had been collecting pieces that needed work for months, knowing I was moving stockpiling them against the day I'd have a new space. An arts and crafts bookcase with a broken side panel. A 19th century side table whose veneer had lifted and bubbled. A Windsor chair that needed 3 new spindles and a complete refinishing. I started with the Windsor chair. Ryan came the second weekend in September. He drove up on a Saturday morning, and we walked to a diner in town and had breakfast, and then we walked back, and I showed him the workshop, and he ran his hands along the workbench the way he used to do when he was a boy, with that same quality of reverence that some people reserve for churches. "You're happy here," he said. It was not a question. "I am," I said. "Good." He picked up a wood plane, turned it over, set it back down. "Lauren's pregnant." I went very still. He was looking at the tools, not at me, and I understood that was deliberate. He needed to say this to the air first before he could say it to my face. "We found out last month," he said. "We weren't sure. We've been trying for a while. We weren't sure it was going to happen." I looked at my son. He turned and met my eyes, and his face was doing everything at once, joy and fear, and something that looked like an apology he didn't know how to make. "Dad," he said, "I want this child to know you, really know you. Not the polished version, not the occasional visit version. Know you, the way I know you, the way you taught me how to use a hand plane when I was 10 and I felt like I could do anything." My throat was very tight. "You're going to have to come up more than once a month," I said. He laughed. the real laugh. And his eyes were wet, and so were mine, and neither of us did anything about it because at this point in our story, we had both run out of the kind of dignity that requires you to pretend you're not feeling what you're feeling. "I know," he said. "I know, Dad." I put my hand on my son's shoulder. He put his hand over mine, and we stood in my new workshop in my new house near the ocean, and I thought about Evelyn. I thought about what she would have said. I thought about the paper calendar on the refrigerator, with every birthday marked the pies from scratch, the laugh that lasted 43 years of bad jokes. I thought about the 47 people who had contacted the foundation in the first 3 weeks. The 83-year-old woman without access to her own bank account. Gloria and Harold and Patricia in the beige room with folding chairs trying to find words for things that shouldn't have required words. I thought about a power of attorney with my name already filled in sitting in a drawer I was never supposed to open. I thought about standing in a hallway with my hand flat against the wall, listening to my own son calculate the timeline of my irrelevance. And then I thought about this, a wooden box, imperfect and crooked-lidded, made for a woman who was gone by a man who was trying to become someone she would recognize. None of this was simple. None of it was clean. Real life rarely is. But here is what I know on the other side of all of it. Here is what I have earned the right to say. I am 76 years old. I built something from nothing alongside a woman I loved for 43 years, in a town where people knew my name and trusted my hands. I raised a son who lost his way and is finding it again imperfectly, which is the only way anyone ever finds anything. I protected myself when protecting myself was the hardest and most necessary thing I had ever done. I built a foundation that is changing real lives. I moved to the ocean because I wanted to, and I had the right to want things. I sat in my workshop that September afternoon after Ryan left in the good, honest quiet that follows a real conversation, and I thought about the question that had haunted me in the months after Evelyn's death, the question that Ryan's arrival had seemed to answer, and then complicated, and then finally through all of this resolved in a way I had not expected. The question was, what is my life for now? And the answer sitting there with sawdust on my hands and a Windsor chair in front of me waiting for 3 new spindles and my son's phone number already pulled up on my phone because I was going to call him on Wednesday and the Wednesday after that. And the Wednesday after that was so plain and uncomplicated that I almost laughed. It is for this: the work, the people, the repair of broken things, the patient, attentive, grain-following work of making something damaged become whole again. Money can be inherited. Houses can be sold. Wills can be contested and estates disputed, and families can spend years in courtrooms, arguing over the value of things that were never really about the things. But the moment when your son stands in your new workshop and tells you he is going to have a child, and he wants that child to know you really know you, that cannot be inherited, that cannot be sold, that is yours, and it is real, and it was worth every single thing it cost to get here. I picked up my tools. The Windsor chair was waiting. I went back to work.